Hey, good morning. Hi,
Good
Matt.
good morning, George. How are you?
Great. I'm great. Thank you.
I I feel like you're close, but you're far.
So we're in the office today together in
And
various places, undisclosed locations in the office.
and then I realized you weren't actually in the office next to where I'm seated, which would have been a gigantic failure if I just started slamming on the door to see if we could hear it come off on the other side, and then everyone had no clue what I was doing. So,
Yes.
with that said, good morning.
Good morning. It's excellent. Thank you. And hey, I haven't been here 2 weeks. It's been I definitely missed coming here and doing our live stream. It's a really great event. I look forward to every week. We had a really, and I just want to say a really big thank you to Ray Orsini and Mike Powers for joining last week. The three of you guys did an unbelievably interesting uh, a rabbit hole of quantum computing Q Day and the futures. It's some really interesting stuff like that, and I really had a great time, being on vacation. So I really enjoyed it. Thank you, Drew. I missed you guys too. So really enjoyed it. So today we have actually a pretty cool topic. It's one that one that we don't generally talk about very often, but one I think that's really important, and I think that has a lot of implications for like big things to get done. That's supercomputers, and you do not need any radioactive spiders. There's no aliens. There's no
Oh,
mix up.
so you watched last week's episode, is what you're saying?
Yes, 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 yes. It's there. There's no aliens involved in the making of supercomputers that we know about. So, we maybe one day we'll do a conspiracy theory episode, but I'm not going to go there today. So, Matt, what's the definition of a supercomputer? Let's kind of give some edges.
Birds are not real. Um,
Are you saying they're over replaced? Stop it.
okay, so a supercomputer, by definition, it's a computer with a high level of performance when compared to a general purpose computer like the ones we're using right now.
Well, what does that mean?
It's like a computer plus plus. It's a computer
Okay.
whose speed is so much massively faster than what we're using that it enables us to perform calculations and do research that we simply can't do with the types of resources we have in front of us.
Okay.
They also happen to be computers that are very commonly very large. I think we're used to seeing machines that sit on desktops or underneath desktops, the ones that we always bang our knees into when getting up from desks. And that's
Right.
kind of the annoyance. But it's, a machine that's what, like 12 pounds, 15 pounds or something like that. In this case, we're talking about machines that take up entire buildings in some cases.
Right.
Or are these really cool kind of mod looking units that are maybe 6 or 7 feet tall with like, I don't know, a footprint of 36 square feet and look like they should belong in a 1960s kitchen because they were orange and avocado green. There's a lot of variation here when we're talking about supercomputing.
Yeah, and the term goes back pretty far into the history of computing. Like back in the even days when there was mainframes and mini computers and that kind of era. So so is there kind of like a measure of speed that you would utilize?
Yeah, I mean, look,
supercomputers.
With supercomputers, they're measured in a different way. They use flops, floating point operations per second, I want to say. Sometimes we get them mixed up with MIPS, and I'm not going to sit here and go through the notes. I'm going to do this the right way and use the old brain.
Yes.
A floating point operation per second. Floating point is a number with a certain level of precision to it.
Right.
It's required to do this kind of work. And there are supercomputers that can perform at like 10 to the 17th power flops, which means 100 quadrillion floating point operations per second.
Right.
Anything happening in that level of in that scale is just difficult to wrap one's head around. It's very much like the 300 trillion year span that we talked about last week.
Right, the Q Day conversation. This is more like the evolution or scaling up of normal computing functions, right? As opposed to the Q Day, which is like this whole different paradigm of computing.
Q Day is a completely different way of working with computers from a level of physics when you want to get down to it. But what you're saying right now about this progression, I would say it's more like a roller coaster. Things go up and down, they get bigger, they get smaller.
Right.
we work with machines that are a lot smaller and more powerful than a lot of older stuff these days because these first existed. So I don't know if they're really part of
Right.
moving forward or so much as is looking backwards. But I do think that they're the stopgap between what we consider to be general purpose computing and what quantum computing brings to us in the future.
Right.
And
That makes
that's like
sense.
the beauty of them is that they're tangible. You know, we've got
Right.
photos where we can say that's a supercomputer.
That
I
thing
think
exists. It's here.
yeah, when you look at a quantum computer, you're like, I think that's the inside of a washing machine. Like, you know,
Right. It's a black hole.
there's a lot of
So
copper, there's a lot of wires, and something looks like it's probably really cold. So I don't know what this thing is.
yeah, I think it has to run how many
Um,
degrees absolute zero.
but
So
so but back to flops really quickly because I did go off
sure.
on a tangent there. It is a unit of measurement that's used to gauge the performance of a supercomputer, whereas with the computers that we typically use, we measure things in megahertz or
Right.
gigahertz at this
Gigahertz. Right.
point. And I took the time to attempt to take my Windows PC at home and get the specs on it and see what I can do to try and figure out if there was a way to convert to flops just for the sake of having a apples to apples comparison to show people the difference in power.
Right.
And then I ended up getting like 3 Excedrin and going to sleep. It didn't happen.
It gave you the it gave you a headache in the eye kind of thing.
It was like I felt like I was like Neil deGrasse Tyson with like all the floating letters and numbers, but I had no clue what any of them meant.
Right.
At that
Right.
point.
Right.
But yes, but the flop is the unit of measurement used with the supercomputer, and yeah, it's just that there is a basis. You can create a comparison between a traditional general purpose machine like we use nowadays and a supercomputer, but the amount of time and effort it took didn't feel like it was a good thing for the live stream. Although if we do a piece of content on supercomputing, I'm definitely going to make sure that we have the good numbers in there because then they're going to be readable at that point. I'm going to be
Beautiful.
able to
Right. Here
explain
we're
them.
just here we're just talking. So
Yeah, this
so
is just
this is talking. What's the history of supercomputing? How did supercomputers come into existence? I mean, obviously there was like early computing back in the 40s that were, and so when did the official supercomputer come exist?
thousands of years ago. Giant abacus. No.
Ah, got it.
No, they span back to around the 1960s, I'd say.
Right.
There was ENIAC, which was the first kind of like programmable general purpose computer that came out in 1945. So kind of
Right.
like post-war kind of
Yeah.
innovation.
Right.
And then you had the Livermore Atomic Research Computer that came out from UNIVAC in 1960.
Right.
So that actually predates the Beatles, doesn't it?
It's right. It's right
A little
around
bit,
the same era. If you're talking
right?
about Beatles haircuts and those like peg leg suits, and people are building atomic research computers. So it's
There
kind
you
of
go.
interesting. It's kind of that's 60, 70 years ago. So it's kind of an interesting interesting setup that they did that. And
It is.
what would they build it for?
They built it for defense research. It was built for the U.S. Navy.
Hmm.
It, and I wish this is one of those things that I'm going to look up further. And I kind of like I wish I was in the room because apparently someone was like, "We just want a computer that's 100 times faster than anything that exists right now."
Get on that.
Like, I don't know anything about these machines, but I want something that's 100 times faster. I know that much.
Right. Right. Right.
And at the end of the day, it didn't meet that benchmark of performance.
Right.
But it didn't matter. It was purchased by the Los Alamos National Lab, and I believe that's nuclear related. Los
Yeah, but
Alamos, right?
Los Alamos is where the first nuclear test, and they still use it for nuclear testing. Los Alamos and White Sands, New Mexico.
There we go.
So,
I was trying to think of what it was from.
yep.
And it was also sold to some customers in England and France, and it's the basis of the IBM 7950 Harvest.
Oh,
That is a supercomputer that was specifically built for cryptanalysis or the study of encryption. And we've got a nice little boom.
yep.
We've got a definition there because I couldn't remember it, but it is an interesting art, and we're gonna have something interesting on that for the stream in the next few weeks. Something I'm cooking up personally that we're gonna have a little fun
Yeah.
with. And maybe even give someone a prize if they can break the what I'm putting together, which is
All
meant to be
right.
fun. It's not going to be some like high tech thing. It's going to be anyone can figure it out.
Your classic Caesar code, which is the one everyone learns when you learn you're learning cryptanalysis for the first time. It's a whole special. It's a very
Uh,
special thing. So
I
it's
would
cool.
say if I were to give any of it away, we might give people some unfair advantages, but we're going to have some fun with it next
Fair
few weeks.
enough.
Probably
Love it.
around Labor Day.
So,
Sorry, Memorial Day.
mm,
So yes, these machines were around. They've done a lot. I mean, anything related to cryptography, you're going to realize at some point that there's a significant amount of power that's required. So I think
right,
that as time goes on, as we talk about some more things like this, that's going to become a bit of a trend.
right,
But you know, as there is with a lot of different types of technology, there are limitations that exist. And the limitations that existed then are things that we take for granted. We take for granted today.
right. Like high-speed interconnects and solid state hard drives.
Not
Back then it
even
was magnetic
solid
tape,
state. No,
spinning disk
yeah,
platters.
it wasn't even a spindle yet. They were
Right.
probably using tapes for most of these things, which is why all of the like the James Bond movies and the other stuff, when you get into like the evil guys' layers, they always have the big machines and they've got the spinning tapes and everything.
Yep.
It's
That's the
inspired
magnetic
by
tape.
contemporary supercomputers at the time.
Right. Exactly.
I wonder if we can get a prop like that and just put it in the hallway. How great would that be? Just have a tape spinning all day, all day. It doesn't actually do anything, but it's there.
It looks cool.
Yeah, it's data protection. Um, but so a little time goes by, and then Seymour Cray kind of comes on the scene in a big way.
Right.
Now, I think that whether or not you're up on or aware of or care about supercomputers and everything else, Cray is one of those brands or name that I think is in everyone's lexicon when it comes to IT, whether we've worked with anything from them or not.
Well, there's a interesting Visio supercomputer icon
Mm.
that's basically looks like a Cray. If you saw a Cray, it's what the supercomputer would look like.
And
So
Cray is the supercomputer that I think belongs in a 1960s kitchen. It's right
yeah,
there. It's the thing with the it's so hard to even explain, but it's over off to the right hand side of the photo.
it's mauve.
And they're an interestingly
Yeah.
constructed piece of equipment.
Yes.
But Cray, I mean that's big stuff right there. That's a major, I'd say, not waypoint. What's the word I'm looking for in history? As far as it's an event.
It's a defining moment, right?
Thank you. It
It's when
is.
and the big defining moment, it was the transition from germanium to silicon transistors. I mean,
That
that's a huge change. I mean, think about it. Then that was in 1964, and now it's 2022. So, and we're still using silicon transistors as of today.
we're still
So,
somehow managing to make piles of sand really smart. And that'll be another topic that we'll go into. But
right,
that really was a major difference. It allowed data to travel quicker as these operations were being run. And of course, cooling is a big deal because whenever you're pushing data, that's really just pushing electricity from point A to point B, and
right.
that builds up heat, and that can be very destructive, not only on the information and what you're trying to do, but the equipment itself.
Yes, I
So
mean, just total modern aside is look at the power utilization of cryptocurrency,
oh,
uh,
Bitcoin mining machines.
Bitcoin mining machines, and
Yeah.
even the ASICs, and I mean,
Or a good video card.
yeah, or a good video card, right? That's why video cards not available or
Mhm.
still in short supply, and this generates vast quantity. It's really converting electricity into heat,
Yeah.
like an day.
Yeah, I mean, when the Pentium 4 processor came out, I remember reading an article of someone that put a potato inside their machine and ended up baking it by the end of the workday. And that just to give a sense of how much heat can be put off.
Yep, yep,
So the innovations that came from Cray, and not just him. I mean, it's clearly entire team, a company, but
right,
it's his name on it. Really pushed a lot of even contemporary computing forward, or made it possible.
right.
And eventually he left CDC where this happened to start
Hmm.
and actually found Cray research, which is what we're
Right.
really talking about at the moment, and delivered a supercomputer, the Cray One, which is on the cover, the title card for today's episode, and that ran at 80 megahertz. So we actually did have a chance to see something
Right.
that was like in comparison. Now, 80 megahertz doesn't sound like a lot to us right now, but we're talking 1972.
Right.
The computer I had in 1988 with the turbo button enabled was 8 megahertz. And that was like high end for home use.
That was a lot of machine.
Yeah. So when
That
you think
was
80 megahertz in 1972,
right.
that's power. That, that
Correct.
that's how they did the calculations to come up with those amazing polyester shirts with the big collars.
Disco
Little known
colors.
fact. Could have
Little
been
disco.
one.
Little disco.
Yeah, the Cray supercomputers are actually the reason disco exists.
Yes.
But so in 1972, we're talking 80 megahertz, and that
Right.
actually threw me for a little bit of a loop when I was reading and doing some research. And then 1985, the Cray 2 was released.
Right.
And that is when they hit 1.9 gigaflops as far as speed goes, making it the first supercomputer to break the gigaflop barrier. Now, unfortunately, we're getting into that weird conversion space again between megahertz and flops and everything
Right.
else. So just trust us, it's a big number. Um, now,
Cool.
interestingly enough, Cray, as indelible of a mark as they've left on computing, and I mean, just the name Cray alone, they've been acquired a couple times over the years. First by
Right.
Silicon Graphics, which was a
Right.
really interesting manufacturer of machines for all different types of purposes.
Yeah,
Um,
particularly they were known in the creative space and
oh yeah.
creating like video editing systems and animation, early animations, and it
Mhm,
was a
mhm.
super powerful system. So kind of
Super
made sense.
powerful, specialized equipment for very specific reasons that have kind of disappeared to an extent because of the power that we have right now. That said, Hewlett Packard Enterprise actually purchased Cray in 2019. And I think, mixed feelings about that. I was just very happy to know that the name, the legacy will
Sure.
continue.
Yeah.
But I was a little surprised to see that happen in 2019. I felt like it happened a lot longer ago, but I guess
Right.
that also explains the amount of awareness that even we have when it comes to certain technologies. There's so
Well,
much out there, you
well,
know?
if you don't work on it day in day out, why would more? It's more of an intellectual curiosity thing than it is anything else.
Mhm.
So, and what's interesting too is that they ran on their own back in the old days. They worked on proprietary systems, and now they're very much
They're open.
open source. They
Yeah.
run in Linux, and and I think almost all of the fastest computers run a Linux kernel at some point at this point.
Yeah, I mean, no hate on Microsoft, but do you expect to see them running Windows?
Well, I think it's a lot more as a researcher and
Yeah,
as someone who's building purpose built stuff. You want to be able to build it with some impunity or some
exactly.
knowledge that it's not going to be impacted by a company's whim,
Mhm.
that sort of thing. So.
Or even that the inspiration behind the system controlling the machine is really for scientific research and purposes.
Right, and actually that goes into like, well, why would you have what do you do with the supercomputer?
Yeah.
I mean, besides world domination,
Well,
like
it's
in
like
James
world
Bond,
domination, kind of like Doctor Evil type things, are
right?
obviously the number one use
Of
these
course,
machines.
sharks and lasers. I get it. I get it. Yeah.
That's how they target. But there are really, really interesting uses.
Right.
For example, with respect to military operations, uh, you can't test weapons out in the open,
Right.
right? I mean, we just talked about Los Alamos, and that was in the open, but it was also a very isolated area, so it was
Right.
like
And they
all
stopped.
that.
They stopped doing nuclear tests in the 50s. It was like actually actively detonating weapons.
Yeah,
So this
no one
is
needs that,
no one needs
right?
that. It's problematic.
But the fact is that we have to, in order to be able to defend ourselves, we have these weapons, and we have
Right.
to understand how they work. And supercomputers allow us to perform simulations
Right.
on things like blast radius of a nuclear
Right.
blast,
Right.
um, items, numbers related to ballistics and how projectiles fly in different
Right.
conditions, and how they can be modeled to either be more efficient or maybe a little bit more humane at times. I think that I was reading about that a little bit, and of course, we talked a little bit about cryptology earlier. At least I shared the link, the definition,
Right.
and a lot of machines with this level of power are the ones that are going up against Q-Day and working
Right.
on some of the quantum proof, big air quotes,
Yeah.
quantum proof encryption
Right.
technologies. These are
Well,
the machines that are going to do it.
right, they're gonna need to develop those systems,
Mhm.
develop those techniques. So
Yeah,
I
and
also yeah.
sorry. Go
So
ahead. Go ahead.
no, as I say, it's really interesting, and I think that I mean, we always know is military cryptography, but supercomputers have super useful other uses that are really directly impact this thing. The one that we really think about, I always think about, is weather analysis,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, the weather. I mean, it's such a complex. Why do you think? I mean, weather like weather app and is weather underground is weather meteorology NOAA. They need. I mean, it's weather is such a complex thing. I mean, imagine taking the millions of inputs from weather stations around the country or the world, and weather impacts everything everyone does at all
Imagine
times.
having any kind of equation where you don't have anything that's a constant.
Correct.
I mean, that's really what it is when you think
It's
about it.
it's the butterfly flapping its wings in the Amazon, and next thing you have a hurricane in New York. So
Yeah.
it's and that's
And
real.
like I was watching the news this morning. I watched Channel 7 in the morning, and Sam Champion was kind of, just doing the forecast, and it was still night. Oh, not night, but it was still dark outside, and he was only able to do an infrared representation of the cloud cover.
Right.
And that kind of just blew my mind on its own. I
It's
was
pretty
just
cool.
like, the amount of data you're processing to have that happen is awesome. I'm sure it's happening in another location. It's not you. You're essentially interpreting the data. But the fact that you have imaging systems that are pulling down cloud cover based on the temperature of the
Right.
clouds is just
Right.
amazing, and it's being rendered in somewhat real time. It was
Right.
like 6:15 in the morning. He's like looking at something that was dated for like 6:08 in the morning. Like sometimes you'll like see like the little, like a little tag on there.
Timestamp. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
timestamp. And it's just like that's a lot of information being processed. That's a lot of visuals being rendered in that time, let alone all
Correct.
the data that's going to lead to what those visuals are going to look like.
Right.
So the idea of supercomputing, or yeah, it probably has changed somewhat over the years, but the fact of having incredibly powerful computing resources to be able to help us know whether or not we need to keep an umbrella in our bag is a big deal. It's a tiny
Re-
thing, but the amount of work that goes into being able to say, take an umbrella with you.
Exactly.
It's,
And that accuracy of forecast, right? Like, yeah, it's cloudy, it's probably gonna rain, but it's gonna rain at like 6:15 this morning or 7:15, when's it gonna start, when's it gonna end, that sort of stuff.
yeah.
I mean, there's some other uses. I mean, obviously for any kind of climate change, any kind of ocean level, all that stuff, all taking input from supercomputers and building models
Any
around it.
significant change to our environment that takes place in a scope that may be longer than our lives, I think
Right.
is a good way of looking at it, right? So we're talking about the prediction of earthquakes, understanding the damage that they do, the shifting of plates in the ocean. There's so much that these supercomputers do for us that we don't even really think about on a daily basis. And
Right.
we're talking about our environment, but let's look at a more local environment, ourselves, our bodies.
Exactly. I mean, there's so much biological and life sciences around supercomputers. I mean,
Mhm,
I remember reading articles about drug testing, using all this instead of having to use live subjects for every part of the process. You can use supercomputers
mhm,
and build
mhm.
these complex models and really understand. I mean, just giant medical record correlations, taking vast quantities of millions of people's medical records and looking for patterns and finding correlations that this drug use and these longitudinal studies, and there's so much to it, right? Like
Mhm.
it's like, and imagine how much more real time it can be, that even in this current pandemic, like
Yeah, look,
what's what are we gonna learn from it?
when someone's welfare is involved, every second matters,
Right.
right? And this is how
Exactly.
we make those things happen. And it's also about things like understanding how brain injuries impact us, and
Hmm.
how blood flows throughout the body, and what may be a limiter or a factor that leads to, say, stroke. A lot of the information that we have comes from simulations that come from supercomputers. Vaccines, medications, everything, you name it. DNA. I mean, look at all the work that's being done in genetics these days.
Sequencing,
Yeah,
that's
no
and
one's using a compact Presario for that.
hey, don't knock the Presario. It was quite a good computer at its time. And I think so. I mean, other places that you'd find supercomputers required is
Look
aviation,
up.
transportation.
Just look up.
Exactly, but all factors of it:
Mhm.
aircraft, shipping, car design,
Hey, think about
trucking.
like and this is you and me here. I'm not, but when you would go on the train through Jamaica Station in Queens, all of the switches, the switching tower,
Yeah,
all that's been modernized over the years. It's not like some kind of old school switchboard or something like
that's
that
true.
anymore.
That's true.
I'm sure that yeah, Drew may have had a conversation with me this week about the show. There's so many things that are going on that help us get from point A to point B in during the day, and a lot of it's coming from supercomputing and
Right.
flight simulators. Oh my gosh! I mean, we've all seen. Let's not even talk about flight simulator like airplanes. You remember what was Apollo 13?
Yes.
Right? They had that great simulator scene with like Kevin Bacon and Tom Cruise,
Yeah.
Tom Hanks. Wow,
Tom
Tom
Hanks.
Cruise and Gary Sinise, and that was in the 1960s, and that took place, right?
Yeah, it was actually, and it was, and that was like and the thing was those computers were super purpose built. They may not fall under supercomputers, but they definitely use supercomputers for modeling and
Hmm.
all, and the more model they can be upfront, the better the outcome for the product. So it's
Hmm.
it's really interesting, and even some. we're working with a client now that's doing some supercomputer modeling for one of their products that they're working on, because it's such an interesting topic of what they're working on, some energy research. And just reading about how they're doing it and talking to them about it, totally fascinating. And
Oh yeah.
there's so much to it. And I think without having those resources available, and somewhat democratizing access to those resources. That's, cloud computing can kind of push into supercomputing at times based on how you set your cloud environment up, right? You can
Mhm.
bring in those number of resources, and those
It's
and
a
those
scale.
flops,
At that point,
right?
it's a scale. Mhm.
Both horizontally and vertically, like, right, you can get that kind of raw processing power and distributed it across multiple nodes. So
Mhm.
it's some really cool stuff like that. It's like
It
and it's exciting. I mean,
it it's exciting when you look at it in the ways that it's helping us through technology.
right.
But then it's like there's these other things that go on. And I have a bullet here that I love. I'm just going to read it out.
Sure.
Research performed by supercomputers has resulted in 18 wheelers with skirts at the bottom, reducing drag and saving operators the $5,000 a truck per year.
And imagine, take that kind of calculation or that value of
By how many
fuel.
trucks per
eh,
year?
Well, think about it from both
Yeah.
saving money and fuel and CO2 output, and you know wear and tear on the truck, on the road, or there
Mhm.
was they have less time driving. It could be any one of these things that could impact
Yeah.
the outcome. So
There's a decrease in all the different maintenance and resource usage that's going on because of these calculations that were made. And it's amazing that it's just really a matter of modifying airflow, I guess, by reducing drag. You're letting the air pass by. You're not working as hard to get from point A to point B, and it's such a simple thing that took a lot of power to get the answer to, and
right,
it's exciting.
it's
Um,
very
but
cool.
yeah,
It's very
everything's
cool.
getting faster. Everything's getting faster, and we're almost at the end of the stream today. It went
Yes, we
so
are.
quickly.
I
I
know,
think being in the city,
it's a very
everything's a little
fast.
different.
It's all was exciting. So it's funny. Like, as as computers get faster and more power, and obviously cloud and all that stuff, and there's so many advances. And I think the term that gets kicked around now is this fourth industrial revolution, AI, robotics,
Hmm.
um, you know,
Internet of Things, so
Internet
on
of
and so
Things,
forth.
this next generation like communication technology, like which is like 5G's the first toehold in it, and where it's ubiquitous speeds across multiple environments, and it's connected, right? And it's such an interesting and exciting time, and it has a very like um, evolutionary. The things are evolving to a next level, and I think that's really important. There's a lot, and there's so much both evolution and innovation around it. And I think that even today, there's so many researchers out there that are working on these exascale supercomputers, 10 to the 18th power, and then 10, once again, like all things mathematical, you just keep adding one. I think he's growing, and if you can imagine it, it'll happen. And eventually, imagine this combination of uh, quantum and binary computing, what that would look like, and working in conjunction on different tasks, and optimizing it for the task at hand, right? Which is really
Hmm.
exciting. So, I don't know. It's all cool stuff. It's all exciting, and this is part of like us as being curious and wanting to know about stuff. And I think and I said well, I think you and I
No,
both
I
suffer.
mean, I'll be very honest.
Yeah,
I think this is kind of like that springtime itch. I don't know about you, but every
yeah,
year when the weather starts to change, I just become curious and get away
yeah,
from sort of like the more typical things. So this is next couple of weeks. We're gonna just kind of jump out of the normal topics. Next week is gonna be a fun one.
yeah.
We're gonna be
I'm
talking
excited.
about. Why don't you pronounce it? Because I'm not very good at pronouncing the word.
Typography.
Yes, I know. I was almost saying topography or topology earlier, and
I
everyone's
was
just
like
looking at
like
me.
maps. Really,
We're gonna
Matt?
talk about fonts,
I was like,
typefaces.
I like topology. I think it's a really interesting topic if you're outside. But typefaces, and I know when I first started working in creative folks, uh,
Mhm.
I didn't know anything about it. It's something I didn't think about in any way, shape, or form. But it's so important in terms of design, communicating an idea, communicating uh, your goal of getting something across to someone, how you write it. All of us have seen the Comic Sans
I,
email,
I feel
and
like
we're like, ugh.
I feel like you just said all the stuff that your marketing guy would say. So let me turn around and try and do the George stuff. uh, proper font licensing to reduce liability of fines by using resources that you haven't paid for properly.
It sounds good to me, man. All
Yeah.
right.
We're
It
going to hit
sounds
both
good.
sides of it. It's going to be exciting. I'm going to see
Well,
if I can get one or two designer friends to join in, folks that I've done like work with specifically around typography, and find a couple other things. And I'm going to look for it, but I actually have the first book on digital typography by Dick Rubenstein. He used to work at Human Factors International back when I met him, and
right.
I think he's actually considered to be the godfather of typography for as far as digital goes.
Digital. Yeah.
Yeah,
It-
so I'm gonna jump into like the my like kind of like treasure chest of tech odds and ends from over the years and see what
right.
we can do next week to make it a little special, a little
Listen,
different, you know?
yeah, exactly. Thank you, Drew. Papyrus and Comic Sans, everyone's favorite
Stop taking my
fonts.
secrets, Drew.
So awesome. Well, I would say once again, really had a great time with this stream, Matt. If you like what you saw, please like and subscribe. We're on YouTube and a bunch of different platforms, and check us out at thevaliantway.com. And I'll see you all next week. Matt, thanks a lot. See you next week. Oh, I'll see you. I'll see you in about 5 minutes.
Yeah, I'm just gonna walk out the door. I'll see you in a few.
See you in
Everyone,
a few.
have a great week.
Thanks, everyone. Talk to you later.